Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a guide all about Syncthing. Now, Syncthing, at least when it comes to the retro handheld space, is a program that allows us to sync saves, states, ROMs, really whatever you want between devices. So you can go from one to the other with the same saves, the same states, the same really whatever you want. So you can see how this could be very powerful because I personally go from my RG35XX SP and play some games on here, close it up for the day, and then I head over to my AYN Odin 2 Mini, play some games on here. And you might be thinking that's just RetroArch, and yeah, a lot of that is. I can play RetroArch between the two, but when it comes to PlayStation 2 and GameCube, and I'm playing some games on here, maybe I just want to head over into my ROG Ally X and continue playing those same games on here, and I do that. So that is how powerful Syncthing is. You go between one device to the other device to the other device, and you carry over your saves, your states, your ROMs, and really anything you want. And all of this is automatic, so you don't have to do anything after you set it up, and as long as you set it up properly, which I'm going to help you do today, then your actual day-to-day changing of things is zero. I don't really touch Syncthing after I set it up, so it's perfect. And just to reiterate again, this isn't just RetroArch. This is GameCube and Wii. This is Nintendo 3DS. This is PlayStation 2. This could be, if you had multiple x86 devices, Xbox 360, PS3 saves, really whatever you want, you can just sync them across. The only one that I have a problem with is Switch saves, and for the specific reason that for some reason, Switch wants you to open the game first before you replace the save. And so anytime I get a new device and I put all of my Switch saves on it, it doesn't recognize them until I open up the game, try it, close it, and then I have to replace the save. So this guide isn't going to work for Switch saves unless you figure out a reason and let me know on how to get it to work, but every other system I've found that it works. Now I'm going to have to put a very big disclaimer on this guide, and not my usual disclaimer for these guides. This, as opposed to pretty much every other guide I've made, is not going to be beginner friendly, really at all. This is an advanced guide, very much so, because we are dealing with a lot of different things that can break. Saves can break, you could lose your saves. The technology needed, the know-how, all of that, you have to be a bit more advanced than just a beginner. And it isn't easy for me to do a guide like this and explain every little thing. It would just be way too long and it would still be so confusing. And if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, then it would be better for you not to attempt this because you could just break a bunch of different things and it'll cause problems for you. So that's my disclaimer for today. Now, you might be thinking, I already did a syncing video, and you're right, I've done two at this point, both with different programs. One was AutoSync for Google Drive on Android, the other was FolderSync. The problem with those is they were specific to Android. Well, FolderSync you could pay for a Windows version and a Linux version, but they were very much specific to just Android. And then as I started to get more devices that are Linux only, like the SP or really any other device, the TrimUI Smart Pro, and all of these that start to get Syncthing, you couldn't use them for that. Once I made the transition and actually tried to learn it, it ended up being so much better than any other option. So that's what we're using today is Syncthing. It is the best option for any retro handheld that has Wi-Fi, at least. And so let's talk about setup here. And I'll talk about mine personally, but you don't have to copy what I do. I have a 24/7 Windows PC, and on it is all of my ROMs, all of my saves, really everything. Anything that I would be sending out to these devices, it's all there, and it's all hosted there. Now, you don't need to have that. I find it's better to have like a home device of some sort. So if it's not a Windows PC, it could be the ROG Ally X. That could be the one device that you're going to start this process with. Or it could be anything else. Really, it could be the SP if you want it to be. Decide now what device is going to be your prime device, your single device to start everything with. So like I said, my PC was my prime single device, but you might not have a PC that's always on. You might have just a device and a second device. So pick one single device that has and will have all of your ROMs, all of your saves, all of your states, really everything, just to make it easy for you, because that's the best way that I found to do this, is just start with one device. That also means that any other device that you want to sync, so maybe you're doing a 1-2 sync like this, only 2 devices, the one device is going to have everything. This device is going to be empty, and not empty completely. I don't mean completely factory reset it. I mean any saves that you want to sync from the SP to the Mini, for example, you're going to make sure that the Mini has no saves on it. So if it's RetroArch, you're going to make sure that the saves folder on RetroArch is empty. The states folder on RetroArch is empty. If you're going to be syncing other emulators, it is empty. Basically, you want to wipe this of saves, and that way, when you're syncing from here to here, there's no complications. It's just going to sync everything that was on here to here, and then you'll know that it is exactly in sync because there was no complications, nothing conflicting, there isn't anything on here. So you're going to have to go through and make sure that whatever second or third or fourth device that you're going to add that isn't your prime device is empty of saves and syncs and states and all of that sort of thing. But obviously it goes without saying, make sure that you back everything up beforehand because you might want some of that stuff, and just make sure you back everything up. So let's start very easy, and we're going to start with RetroArch because RetroArch is probably the one that everybody wants to sync first, and it is actually very simple. The one thing that you have to be careful of with RetroArch, and it doesn't matter what device you're going to use, is that the saving settings are the same on every single device. And what I mean by that, if you go into RetroArch and you go into settings and you go into saving, it's going to show there all of the different settings that it has. Sometimes it sorts it into core folders for saves. Sometimes it saves it into content directory, which is where your ROMs are. And other times it saves it into its saves folder and just puts everything right in there. No matter what that is, you have to make sure that those settings are the exact same on every single device that you add. That means if you're running a custom firmware like ArcOS, you have to go in and make those changes yourself and match whatever any other device is. So if you have EmuOS and you have ArcOS, you have to make sure that the saves are working the same on both devices or it's not going to work. Personally, if you're wondering how I do it, I actually do it how the default Android way does it, because whenever I set up a new device that's an Android device, I just want it to be very simple. The way Android does it is it sorts it into core folders. So you have the RetroArch folder, the saves folder, and inside of that is each of the core names, and then the saves are inside of there. Any other device, it's the exact same way, and that's how I set it up. So for example, my EmuOS SP, which has it as default already, does the same thing. It does it into core folders. I would probably suggest, if you want an easy way to do this, is just do that. Have all of your saves syncing to core folders. That is the easiest way because it's what I do. Now, states is where things get very messy. If you want to sync states like I do, I personally go from one device to the other device to the other device, and I only load up the state. You have to make sure that every single device has the exact same core. And I don't mean the version of the core. I haven't really run into a scenario where the core has broken it, if it's the same core, but make sure that if you're using MGBA on the SP, you're using MGBA on the Odin 2 Mini, you're using MGBA on the ROG Ally X. It has to be the same core if you want to sync states. Now, this becomes a bit of a problem with some custom firmwares that just don't have access to every single core. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a list of the cores that I personally use, and I found that they at least work from the SP to Android to Windows to ArcOS, and I can't confirm that they're going to work with every single device or firmware, but I can at least confirm that they work with those. So I'll share that. But I think regardless if you're going to sync states, I would personally just make sure that you're using the same cores on every device, and obviously the same RetroArch saving settings, because that is going to give you the best chance of success, and it is really the one thing you need to do when it comes to RetroArch to make sure this is going to work. Now, the next bit of information you need to know for RetroArch is where are those saves, because we have a Windows device, we have an Android device, and we have a custom firmware EmuOS device here. And so RetroArch is probably saving differently in each one. At least on EmuOS it definitely is. For the other two, it's very similar, but if you're using a different custom firmware like ArcOS, it's probably saving differently as well there too. The one thing you have to do now is know the path of where your saves are. So I know that MUOS, it's in the MNT, MMC, MUOS save folder. That is exactly where they are, and everything is in there for saves. For Android, I know that it's on the internal storage in the RetroArch folder and then the saves folder. That is exactly where this is. And then Windows, it's in the RetroArch folder, the saves folder of wherever RetroArch is. Same exact example, but either way, no matter what device you're going to use, if it's not one of these three, if it's an ArcOS device, some other device, you just have to know where your saves are. What is the actual path to those saves? And states if you're going to add those, because that is the other bit of information that you need to know, and it's probably the most important out of everything. And I'm not going to say it's difficult to find saves, because it really isn't. If you want a simple way to do it, load up a Pokemon game, make a save, put that SD card into your PC, and then search the entire drive for Pokemon, and you'll find it right away exactly where it is. So it's very simple to find your saves. Once you do, you know exactly that path. And that path is what we're going to need, because we're going to tell Syncthing that, hey, the saves file path on here, we want to sync it to the saves file path on the Odin 2 Mini. And that way they both are in sync, and that's exactly what we're going to do. You can't do that if you don't know the path, so you have to know it. Now, personally, for RetroArch, I also sync cheats because I like cheats, but you don't have to do so. I'll show you how to do it either way, but once you know how to sync one thing, you basically know how to sync everything else. You can go on a tear and just sync whatever you want. Let's go over into Dolphin now, and for Dolphin, I actually sync the Game Settings folder, the GC folder, and the Wii title folder. Now, Game Settings is exactly what it means. There's settings, it's cheats, it's widescreen patches, it's really everything like that. So if I have that on one device, I want it on another. So I sync that. GC folder is GameCube saves folder. So obviously I want my saves to sync across devices, so I sync that. Wii title folder is the Wii saves. So yeah, I want my saves to sync, and so I sync Wii title. Those are the three folders that I sync for Dolphin: Game Settings, GC, and Wii/title. For PS2, Nether SX2 and PC SX2 share the exact same folder structure, so it makes things very simple. I personally sync the cheats folder and the mem cards folder. Cheats is self-explanatory, it's cheats, so I want to sync those between both devices. Mem cards is the memory card, so obviously I want my saves to sync across devices because that's the whole point of what we're doing. So I sync the mem cards folder from one to the other. And yeah, it works, but it also depends on the Android device that you're using. Some Android devices just won't let you access that partition, no matter what you do. But that's where buying an actual good Android device comes into play. I can't do a blanket statement and say that for Dolphin and PS2, it's going to work for every Android device to sync it, because it doesn't. There are some devices out there that just don't have those capabilities or permissions. I can tell you the Odin 2, Odin 2 Mini definitely do, and there's a few other devices as well, but for purposes of today, those are two that I know of, and we'll talk about later how to see if it'll work for you, but not much I can do if it doesn't work for you. I think it's also important to note, again, just a reminder, if you're going to sync any sort of saves, you have to make sure that any new devices you're adding are empty for those saves. So if you're going to go from the Odin 2 Mini for Dolphin and PS2 saves to the Ally X, make sure the Ally X is empty in those folders for those saves that you're going to sync. It's just good practice. Make sure that that's the case for any new devices you're going to add. For PSP, everything uses PPSSPP, so the folder structure is the exact same on every device. It's very easy. Personally, I'm syncing the cheats folder, the PPSSPP state folder, the save data folder, and the textures folder. Cheats is cheats. States are states, obviously. Save data is where the saves are, and textures is HD textures. And that's optional, you don't have to do that, but I installed some HD textures on the Odin 2 Mini, and I want to have those same textures on the Ally X or any other device, so I sync that. But you can choose not to, and I'll show you how to do that after. Now, these are all kind of the big emulators, but again, the only information you need to know if you want to sync something is the path. That's it. So if you know the path on this device and you know the path on this device, You just tell the two to sync each other. It is that simple. That is the only information that you need to know for syncing, is making sure that they're exact same. With the exception of RetroArch, where you have to fiddle around with some saving settings and all of that, for the most part, all of the other emulators are very simple. There isn't anything different across devices. So you can just sync them and make it simple. Okay, so let's get into installing Syncthing here. And again, before we start, make sure that you have your prime device, if it's this or this or this, whatever it is, has everything on it. And then any other device that you're going to sync, if it's going to be RetroArch, then make sure the RetroArch Saves and States folders are empty on any other new device to start with. Now for Android, it is an app right off of Play Store. So you go and install Syncthing right off the Play Store. It's very simple. For Windows, it is right off the website, and you can go and do that. MeOS has it built in, and it's in the settings. So you can just go and enable Syncthing, and it's right there. ArcOS, you have to do it manually. You have to install Syncthing, and I'll leave instructions in the description to how to do so. Other devices might have it different as well. Not every single device has Syncthing enabled or installed right away. So you have to go and either enable it or set it up or install it, that sort of thing. One other thing for Android, if you want to connect to the device's Syncthing from another PC, head back to Menu, Settings, Syncthing Options, GUI Listen Addresses, and change it to 0.0.0.0.8384. This will be necessary if the device you want to connect to is Android and you want to connect to it from a PC to make all of the Syncthing changes that we need to make. But once you do install it, the easiest part is just to go on a computer and then put the IP address of the device and 8384 as the port. So you go IP address : 8384 to open the Syncthing webpage or the web GUI. MeOS is different. It is actually 7070 as the port because they want to be different, but every other device is 8384 and just the IP address of the actual device. Or you can do it on the actual device if it's big enough, like the Ally X is, but for like an SP, you can't, so you have to do it on a computer. So let's go ahead and do our first sync on our prime device. Click Add Folder, and you're going to get a pop-up to create a folder to sync. Give it a name, and we're going to start with RetroArch Saves. Folder path is where you want to tell Syncthing which folder has our RetroArch saves. And there's a few different ways that you can do this depending on your operating system. Thankfully, Syncthing does show a little pop-up to help you navigate as you type, and that's an easy way to do so, but again, you just have to write out the path. So the difficult part here, and it's going to stump a lot of people, is you have to know the path. And again, this is something we talked about earlier, but if you're running MeOS, then we know where the path is. It is MNT, MMC, MEOS, and the save folder. That is the path to the RetroArch saves. But if you're running Android, it is the internal storage and then emulated 0 RetroArch saves, I believe, something like that. I'll put it on screen. But that is different than what that is. And then Windows is C drive, RetroArch, wherever you installed RetroArch, all of that. Either way, on Windows, it's actually easy because you can just right-click the path in File Explorer and then paste it. On these two, you kind of have to write it out. You have to know exactly where it is. But Syncthing does help you, and it pops up to show you if you're doing it right or wrong. It'll disappear if it's wrong, and it'll show if it's right. But you have to know the path. That is the first step here. Next up, head to File Versioning, and you can tell Syncthing to keep backups of anything that it deletes or replaces when you're syncing. Personally, I use simple file versioning here, and I have it set to 14 days, so it deletes those files after 14 days. If you leave it as 0, this is going to grow over time, and it'll never delete. It's like a recycle bin, except it'll never empty. Head to Advanced, and under Folder Type, you can choose if you want to send and receive, receive only, send only, and so on. This basically means if you choose receive only, nothing you do on this device will sync, and you're only going to grab from another device. Send only is the opposite. It's only going to send from this device. While send and receive will do both, send and receive data, and that is exactly what we want. Click Save, and we now have our first folder that is ready to be synced to other devices. You should see remote devices on the right. Click Add Remote Device. We're going to add our second device to the mix. Now, it goes without saying, but obviously make sure that the second device has Syncthing installed and you opened it at least once, just to make sure. You should see it right away as a nearby device, and there should be a long code. And if you select it, give the device a name so you can easily refer to it. And then under sharing, select the folder that we just created to share it to this device. Now, at this point, nothing happens. All we did was tell the other device that, hey, we have a folder that we want to share with you, but we haven't accepted it yet on the other device. So now you want to go to the other device's Syncthing, and you could just do this in a separate tab. Open the IP address, port of whatever second device is, and you'll get to that Syncthing page, and we can start making changes there. The first thing that you're going to be greeted by is a notification that says, hey, this device wants to connect with you. And yeah, we want to do that. The next notification that you're going to get is that device wants to share a folder with you, and we want to do that as well, because that's the whole point. And now it's the exact same steps as before. You need to know the folder path on this new device to match the folder path of what the other device is. So in this example, we are syncing RetroArch saves. And so on this new device, where is the RetroArch saves folder? And you want to put the path to that in the bottom there. In the sharing tab, just make sure that the other device is selected. File versioning, you want to do the exact same thing that you did on the other device. So set it to simple and then 14 days. At the end, just click save. At this point, it is going to sync all of your RetroArch saves from the prime device to this new device. And when it's done, they're both going to have the exact same data, and it should say up to date on the Syncthing page. Once all of that's done, what I would do is go ahead and try and boot up a game on the new device and see if the save data is synced. And it's very simple. Remember again that this is not states. We didn't sync over states. So as long as you emptied out that folder, it shouldn't pull you into a state. You should just start up a game as normal. And if you do that, I'd probably just use Pokemon to test this. It should say continue right there at the home screen for Pokemon. And if it does, you know that it worked. We synced it over and it worked properly. If it didn't, then you did something wrong. Either your paths are wrong or you didn't sync the right RetroArch saving settings or something else. But this is the easiest way to just check if it worked right away. But once you confirm it actually works, we're kind of done. We're not done. We got a lot more to talk about, but that is it. That's the steps. That is really all you have to do. Exactly what you just did there. You have both devices now synced, so you don't have to say that, hey, this device wants to connect anymore, but you go ahead and do states next. So you say, hey, I have a FolderSync for states. Then you do it and connect it to this. And it's the exact same steps we just did. And it is very simple, as you probably just noticed. We didn't really do anything. The only bit of information that you put in there is the path. That's it. The path to where states are on here and the path to where states are on here. That's all you need to know. I'll do my best to share as much as I know for paths, and I'll put it in the description for saving, at least for most custom firmwares and stuff like that, but I'm not going to have everything there, so I can't help you for every single thing. Now, RetroArch is easy, but I talked about it earlier. Permissions is a big problem for Android. It also is a problem for Windows. So let's talk about that now, and we'll talk about some advanced tips so that I can help you sync Dolphin and PS2 and other emulators besides RetroArch, which is very easy. So again, with Android, there are some devices that you can't sync the Android data partition, which is where Dolphin and Nether SX2 have their saves. Now, even this device, the Odin 2 Mini, and other devices still need a special setting to be changed in Syncthing for it to work with them. And we're going to show that now, but this might not work for every single device, so just be aware. But the setting that you need to change is just open Syncthing, go to Menu, top left, Settings, Behavior, and you want to enable Advanced Folder Picker. Once you do that, you should be able to sync PS2 and Dolphin and basically anything behind the Android data partition. But if you still can't, then it's just your device and you're out of luck, unfortunately. Now for Windows, there are some emulators that do all of their saving behind the app data section of Windows. And you need special permissions to be able to do that under a normal Windows installation. So there's some settings we have to change there. For that, you need to change the Syncthing service to log on as your username and password. And you can do that by going to the Start menu, Services, scroll down to Syncthing, the Logon tab, and you want to browse to your account and log on with your password. After doing all of that, you should be good to sync between both devices of PCSX2, Dolphin, and really everything else, and it should all work. And if it doesn't, then the Android part of your equation is probably the problem, and something is wrong there. But you should get an error, and it'll tell you that the permissions aren't working. So that's the way to know. And there's no fix for that besides buying a better device. And I'm kidding, but no, I'm not really kidding. Just buy a better device. Okay, so another advanced tip is ignore patterns, and this one is very powerful. For example, when you open a FolderSync, you should see a tab called Ignore Patterns. And if you open that, you have to enable it. And then you can see a text box where you can choose things to ignore or specify things to sync. I'm going to use my ROMs folder as the example for this, since I sync my ROMs to all different devices. Let's say it's the RG35XX SP, and obviously the SP can't play Xbox, Xbox 360, Nintendo 3DS, Wii U, and so on. But I have all of those folders in my ROMs folder, and if I choose to sync it, it's going to try and sync those. I don't want to have to go and create 10 different folder syncs for each system folder that I can sync to the SP. Instead, I want to sync the entire folder and just tell it not to sync those specific folders. So it's very easy using ignore patterns. Let's say that out of my entire ROM library of folders, I only want to sync GB, GBA, and SNES. I would put !GB, !GBA, and !SNES on different lines, and then an asterisk on a new line. This tells Syncthing that we only want to sync these folders and nothing else. Alternatively, you can do this the opposite way as well, and you can tell it which subfolders to avoid instead. So instead of writing the folders you want to keep, you would write the folders you want to avoid. So for me, that would be N3DS, PS3, Vita, Wii, Xbox, and so on, and make sure they're all on different lines, and that tells Syncthing that in this specific folder, we are going to ignore those folders and sync everything else. Now let's tie this all back to RetroArch, and if you remember earlier, I also sync the cheats folder in RetroArch. And RetroArch has all of the subfolders right there ready to go. There's a cheats folder, a saves folder, and a states folder. So I can sync the entire RetroArch folder and then put !cheats, !saves, !states, and then the asterisk. And that just tells it to sync only those folders and nothing else. You can even go further and do subfolders if you want, and I do that for Dolphin to sync the Wii title folder. So you can see how powerful this gets. But long story short, ignore patterns helps to just consolidate and organize, so you don't have to have 10 different folders syncing. You could have one folder, and then everything is there because of ignore patterns. It is very powerful that way. Okay, that is going to be it for this guide. It is a very long one, but I'm going to help just consolidate it now into something very simple for you to understand. 1, make sure you know your paths. That's it. Just know your paths of wherever. If you need to know where the saves are on one device, know the path to that. And this device and this device. That is it. Know everything on as far as paths and where things are located. The second, have one prime device to start this all off with. One device that's going to start everything. And then make sure all the other devices are empty for those save folders that you're going to start syncing. After that, after you sync all 3 devices, you can then make it very simple and do any device because they are all prime devices at this point, and you can just make changes to whatever you want. But to start this whole process, make sure you start with one device that is just perfect, and then copy that to everything else. That way you avoid all hassle, and it should be very simple. Enjoy your syncing and your seamless play of devices because it is going to be so much fun after you set it up. Don't forget to like and sub to help this channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk about all these retro handhelds and to come bother me when you get stuck with this. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff, and hope you all have a good one.